Welcome to another action-packed edition of 805 Sports Talk. This week it's just me and Lorenzo, and we're going to be breaking down a lot of football. There's a lot to go over, so we'll get right into it. Now, Lorenzo, you and I called our first football game of the season last week at St. Joseph High School, and it was a pretty competitive first half in the battle for the Shield as St. Joseph hosted Righetti. Then the Knights were able to pull away and win 40-14. What did you take away from that game?
I want to shine a light on the St. Joseph receiving corps. I mean, coming into this season, I heard a lot of buzz and a lot of praise about this unit and how deep it was, how talented it was, and both really checked off the boxes that I had. I mean, guys like Mason Bealey, Nate Guzman, Justin Wong. You also had Jaden Vargas out of the backfield, and guy Joe Miller. I mean, he really proved his worth in this big stage against Righetti. And I mean, one of the things that really resonated with me was what Jim Chavala told me after the game. He was at Bakersfield High, and as you know, Bakersfield High is always loaded with talent, he believes that receiving corps is actually the most talented unit he's ever been around, even those driller teams. So that's saying a lot. And I mean, those names that I mentioned, they could easily be cornerstones on any other team in this region, but St. Joseph has every single one of them.
Yeah, those guys were certainly impressive, but I also thought the guy getting the ball to those receivers was impressive as well. And Dino Maldonado, I had him going something for like 20 for 28, over 300 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and you were really keen on his running ability and his toughness. He took some shots, and he kept going hard. He didn't let up. They were still throwing the ball in the fourth quarter. They had their foot to the pedal throughout the whole game. I thought Dino was really impressive, and I've seen him play quite a bit over the last couple of years. That might be his best game that I've seen him play. What did you think about the quarterback play?
That game really won me over regarding Dino Maldonado, especially on the toughness aspect, because I saw Caleb Thomas. I mean, especially how big Caleb Thomas is. I mean, trying to flatten Dino Maldonado, and he even took a vicious shot like toward the end of the second quarter, but he stayed in. He kept slinging the ball around, kept his composure. So, I mean, I talked to Dino, as you saw afterwards, and he already feels like he's a different quarterback from last year, and it's because of the trust he's able to build in his receiving corps, and also knowing that teams are going to be coming after him. They're going to be blitzing him, stunning him, but he's ready for that. So, I mean, that poise that Dino has is definitely going to carry him throughout the whole entire season, especially with games against San Ynez and Lompoc on the horizon. Yeah,
I don't think we spent enough time examining the schedule that St. Joseph faces this year. They start off with Notre Dame, then have Righetti, St. Bonnie on Friday, then Bishop Diego's in the mix, Arroyo Grande, and then they're going to have to play San Ynez and Lompoc in the LPL. So that's one of the toughest schedules that you'll see, especially for a school of that size and that caliber to take on. So credit to St. Joseph for scheduling, some of the better teams in not only the Central Coast, but, in the state, going to Ventura County, playing at St. Bonnie. That's a big game. Do you think St. Joseph can keep up with them? St. Bonnie is not the same team that they were last year when they played at St. Joseph, but they're always usually pretty good. How do you think St. Joseph is going to do it?
Well, when I look back at that St. Joseph-St. Bonaventure game, Chuck Wick made all the difference, and now he's gone. So that leaves a huge void in St. Bonaventure's backfield. Not only that, on the defensive side of the football, Cameron Fabiki-Lannon is also gone. He was their top shutdown corner, so that young St. Bonaventure secondary is now going against that deep receiving corps at St. Joseph we just mentioned. So I know I picked St. Bonaventure to pull off that upset, but I'm kind of leaning more towards St. Joseph at this point now. Here's another interesting fact that I should probably bring up. You probably know this too, but St. Joseph hasn't beaten a Ventura County school since 2006. Wow. There's a realistic chance that could actually snap on Friday.
Yeah, they've had some trouble with Newberry Park and Camarillo, so maybe that'll change on Friday night playing at St. Bonnie. That's going to be a big game. And got to take a minute to mention Jaden Vargas. He was impressive as well. You mentioned him coming out of the backfield. He can run the ball. He can catch the ball. He had a nice touchdown on a screen play. Ran over Jalen Davis on another play that was called back due to lowering his helmet. Hurdled over another defender, I think that was Davis as well, on that touchdown pass. So Jaden Vargas looked great. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle St. Bonaventure and the physicality that they usually have, being a bigger team, from a bigger area. They usually have some size advantages against their opponents, so that's going to be a good matchup. And if you're interested in seeing some good football, definitely go down to Ventura and catch that matchup.
Bonnie definitely has the size advantage. I mean, obviously they're going to have to win this game off of running the football and making sure Maldonado and his receiving corps, they stay off the field as much as they can. But I really, truly think that this game is going to be a lot closer than what people think.
Okay, and can't overlook Righetti too much. They were right there. They made it 12-6. They got the ball back. Bad snap really hurt them on a punt. So they were there for a little bit. You know, they could have maybe turned the tide with a big play. They had the touchdown catch overturned on a penalty by Jalen Davis, had another big catch by Julian Leone overturned on a penalty. So Righetti was right there. The execution just wasn't there, but I think there is some bright spots for what Righetti did Friday night, and I think they are headed in the right direction. A little more execution from the Warriors and fewer penalties on their side definitely would have benefited them Friday night against the Knights. So it's not all bad for Righetti. They do host Dos Pueblos Friday night. That's going to be a tough matchup for them as well. Moving on to Lompoc, we talked about St. Joseph having a brutal schedule. Lompoc's schedule is not really shaping up to be that difficult. You know, they start with AG, which is always a tough matchup, but we see AG might not be as strong this year after losing to Bishop Diego on Friday, 42-14. Lompoc went on to beat Napomo last week, 42-7, and then they host San Marcos Friday night. Now we know San Marcos was bad last year, going 0-10. They do have a win beating Morro Bay last week, but you know there's not much of a challenge there for Lompoc coming up. They play Santa Barbara, Righetti, Templeton, PV, and then October 20th is the San Ynez game. We think that one's going to be, you know, their next tough matchup, and then St. Joe after that, and then Cabrillo. The schedule's not looking too tough for Lompoc. You haven't had the chance to see them this year, which I know must, you know, be tough for being the Lompoc Valley beat reporter, but you know, just how do you feel about Lompoc right now? Do you think they're going to have a challenge? How do you think they're going to approach the schedule that's coming up?
Well, me personally, I don't think their challenge is going to arrive until October against San Ynez. And either way you look at it, I mean, San Ynez traditionally has struggled at Lompoc and against Lompoc in general. So there's still that advantage that the Braves have. But, you know, in talking to Andrew Jones and some of the players, some of the core players on Lompoc, it's all about finishing. I mean, they still look back at Black Friday of last year as pretty much their motivational cry. They remember clearly what happened, what really happened in that game. They didn't finish the job. So each game, regardless if it's against a Division 13 school or a Division 2 school, they want to make sure they play all 4 quarters. And so Andrew Jones is going to instill that every day in practice.
Now, do you think what happened in that game at Corona Del Mar will affect their approach throughout this season? You know, do you want your guys to be a little bit fresher? Do you want to maybe work them harder so they don't have that type of collapse that they did have late in the playoffs? How do you think you can approach that to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, I think what it really amounts to is that I don't think Andrew Jones wants to run his guys to the ground, because one of the things that I dug up, especially when talking to Trenton Carter before he was getting ready to pursue a career at Allen Hancock, was that he admits he wasn't in shape in that game, and he admits he wasn't the only defender who was in shape. So it was almost like they kind of got ran to the ground toward the end, especially at the bad time. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe Andrew Jones will have a change of philosophy, but you know, he has to do his part to make sure that his guys stay focused, because you know, Lompoc has done this before where they go through the regular season unscathed. They blow out their first 2 opponents in the playoffs, but then they run into a more superior opponent and it comes down to the wire. So, I mean, that Division 3 slate, you already got Newberry Park at 2-0. Sierra Canyon's looking like it's on the rebound, so to speak. And, I mean, you still got Palos Verdes as well. So, I mean, it's definitely a much more difficult realm this time around, but you know, we've seen this over and over again with Andrew Jones. He knows how to prepare his guys. He knows how to keep his guys focused and also keep them away from Twitter as well. So.
Yeah, and you can see the voters for the CIF polls are already, you know, giving a lot of respect to what Lompoc's done. They started 10th in Division 3, moved up to 3rd after the win over AG, and this week they're ranked 2nd behind top-ranked Charter Oak. So the voters are definitely, you know, impressed with what Lompoc has done, even though the opponents haven't been that tough so far. You know, there's been a lot of movement in that division overall, but, you know, I think some of the Lompoc players were angry to be ranked 10th in that division, and then they're pretty, you know, impressed with themselves to already be moved up to 2nd after 2 games. So there's been a huge jump for the Braves after moving up to Division 3 this year, starting 10th and already at 2nd 2 games in. They host San Marcos Friday night. I don't think that'll be much of a challenge. San Marcos has had a tough go of it as late. They are a little bit better this year after beating Morro Bay. Now, we're going to switch it over to the 8-man side. You know, we don't do a whole lot of 8-man, but this week it's going to be special. We are broadcasting Orcutt Academy's game against Mojave. Mojave is the defending Division I champion, so kickoff is at 7 p.m. and that game is at Pioneer Valley. So, you know, a lot of people aren't familiar with 8-man, but it's a lot of fun. It's very competitive. You know, it's not too different from 11-man football, and Orcutt Academy is almost like an 11-man team with some of the talent they have, the depth. They have about 34 players on its roster, so Orcutt Academy is a legit team. Mojave is as well, so that's going to be a big showdown. How are you feeling, you know, on the verge of your first 8-man football broadcast?
I'm excited for it. I mean, it's been said it's like arena football, but on grass. So, you know, I know midfield's at the 40, and there's a lot more passing involved. But, you know, there's two guys I'm definitely curious to watch this upcoming Friday, and certainly two names that have been brought to my attention. Darren Miller, who's a dual threat quarterback, a tall dual threat quarterback. I mean, the guy looks as if he could be built to play in the LPL or even the Pac-5. And then you got Alex Andrade, who's more of the blue-collar lunch pail kind of guy for the Spartans. So I'm going to be zeroing in on how those guys play against the defending champs.
Yeah, and Orcutt Academy does have some speed and talent on the offense besides Miller. Jared Sutton's a good, dependable ball carrier. Eddie Lundberg has been huge, already 200 yards rushing through 2 games. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to Miller. I haven't seen too much of him in game action. I don't get to cover a lot of 8-man games since he's been there, but I'm really excited for it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it's not just that it's an 8-man game that we're broadcasting. It's a big game. You know, this is a big matchup for that level of play. And this is Division I 8-man football, the top of the top. You know, there's Division I, Division II. VCA is a Division II team, so it's a little lower. But Orcutt Academy, you know, this is pretty much one of the better teams, better matchups in the state on the 8-man level. So it's going to be a lot of fun to bring you guys that action. So we'll be live at 6:45 p.m. Friday night from Pioneer Valley. Be sure to tune in. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of action. You know, you mentioned it is like arena football, a lot of scoring. You know, so if you're into offensive football and a lot of action, be sure to tune in Friday night at SantaMariaTimes.com. Now, Orcutt Academy has a big game moving over to Pioneer Valley. They do not play this week, but they are 2-0. They edged Napomo in their opener and then blasted San Luis Obispo last week. So the Panthers are on a roll. Matthew Garcia has been playing really well. Nicholas Robledo has been helping out as well at the quarterback position and running back position. So it seems like John Ruiz, Pioneer Valley coach, has got that figured out. The schedule hasn't been too tough, but they are going to, you know, play AG when they come back from their bye, and then they have Santa Maria, then Atascadero, and Lompoc. So they got the easy part of their schedule out of the way. Now it gets real tough after their bye week, taking on AG. And AG has struggled this year, but they're going to be pretty motivated to get back on the right track with what's happened so far. They play Independence this week, and then they'll take on Pioneer Valley the following week. So that's going to be a tough matchup for the Panthers coming off their bye. And we saw this last year with Pioneer Valley going 2-0. And then kind of struggling after that. So we'll see if they can bounce back. Maybe the AG game will be a little bit closer this year than it was last year. So we'll see that. And then, of course, the big Santa Maria game. Santa Maria has never beat Pioneer Valley. And talking to a lot of the Pioneer Valley players, they do not want to be the first group to lose to Santa Maria. So that's going to be a big one as well, that big Santa Maria PV matchup. Then Atascadero, then Lompoc.
I want to say this about Pioneer Valley. I mean, it's been a nice start for them, and I mean, they did struggle against Napomo, even though they were managed to squeak that out. And either way you look at it, even though Napomo's a young team, it's still a very well-coached football team, so it's still a significant win for the Panthers. But I think that Arroyo Grande game for next week, that's going to answer these two questions for us. Just how good is Pioneer Valley, but also how bad is Arroyo Grande really?
Yeah, that is a very intriguing matchup. Usually, you know, we don't know how that one's going to turn out, but it usually favors Arroyo Grande. But I think, you know, you're right. We're going to find out a lot about both those teams in that matchup with Pioneer Valley coming off its bye. And moving on to Santa Maria, the Saints fall into 1-1. They started out 2-0 last year, but they are 1-1 after falling at Santa Barbara 47-26 last week. Some tough news, Isaiah Garcia, maybe the Saints' best two-way player. He was injured against the Dons, and it looks like he's going to be out Friday. He's having an MRI this week, Santa Maria coach Dan Ellington says. So we'll see how Santa Maria can do against Cabrillo. Cabrillo, we know, has been struggling. They lost to Dos Pueblos 65-0 last week. How do you feel about this Santa Maria-Cabrillo matchup set for Friday night?
I mean, I feel like that if you're Cabrillo, you should feel some sort of confidence knowing that you have had success against Santa Maria, and you know that Santa Maria is not Dos Pueblos, but the Saints have been on the rise lately, as we saw last year toward the end. I mean, the last thing Cabrillo wants to do in this game is to get blown out the way they did against Dos Pebbles and the way they did against Frontier. I mean, a third consecutive blowout is pretty much going to just lose the confidence of these kids. So, to me, I feel like that already Cabrillo's at its most important game of the season.
Yeah, and it's just the third game of the season. I think Santa Maria is probably feeling that same way coming off the loss at Santa Barbara. I know Coach Ellington thinks that they could have played better over there. He was a little bit let down on the team's execution, so they're going to be fired up as well. And, you know, Cabrillo beat Santa Maria 22-15 last year. And talking to Kenny Kress, who covered that game last year, he felt that Santa Maria easily could have won that game. So the Saints are going to be motivated to bounce back from last week's defeat at Santa Barbara and to avenge last year's defeat to Cabrillo. So I think you're going to see two really motivated teams at Santa Maria Friday night, and that's the Saints' home opener. They've had to start both of their games on the road. They finally get to come back home, so there's going to be a lot of energy, I think, you know, Friday night at Santa Maria High School. That might not be the marquee matchup of the week, but it is a big one for both teams. I think that one's going to be a very good game. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Santa Maria runs away with it, but Cabrillo has shown they can keep it close against the Saints. So I think it's either going to be a big Santa Maria win or it's going to be a real tight one. I don't think Cabrillo will kind of run away from Santa Maria in that game. So I think that's going to be a real good matchup Friday night. And they used to be league opponents in the LPL. Now Santa Maria's in the Northern League. Cabrillo is still in the LPL for this year. So they have a lot of familiarity between those two programs. I think that's going to be a really good game. I know the Santa Maria fans are looking forward to finally seeing their team at home. Moving to another team that's on a bye is San Ynez. Lorenzo, you've been real high on them, and you know they've proven you right with two, convincing wins so far, and they're 2-0. Josh McClurg has done a great job with those Pirates. They're on a bye. They stayed at number 5 in Division 10 this week after beating Carpinteria 63-0. They play Napomo after their bye. How do you think Santa Ynez is feeling right now going into its bye 2-0 and scoring over 120 points in the two games?
McClurg has to love what he sees on offense, especially when you get a guy like Dustin Gregg, who, I mean, he has some pretty big shoes to fill with replacing Mike McCoy, but he's almost looked Mike McCoy-esque in the two games that I've seen from Santa Ynez. But, we talk about, teams that have a lot of emotions, teams that have a lot of focus. Count Santa Ynez as a team that has a combination of both. I mean, the emotions from, working so hard, going 8-2, not making the playoffs, but also the focus of knowing that, now they have a lot of scrutiny. Now they know that this is not a Santa Ynez team that goes 2-8 or is at the bottom of the rankings. Now it's a team that's right up there with Lompoc. So, I mean, there's a lot of that focus that comes into play for not only McClurg, but making sure that his players are also dialed in.
Yeah, I don't know if McClurg has got enough credit for what he's done there the last 2+ seasons. They were 1-9 not too long ago. People do look at the schedule that Santa Ynez is playing, but I can't blame them for the schedule. A lot of these games were kind of scheduled and are kind of, rivalry games that they play Santa Barbara County teams a lot. So I can't really fault them for their schedule, but they have dominated who they have played, and that's really all you can ask of your team. But what McClurg has done there is really turn that program around. He was kind of on a tight rope there for a little bit with, a 1-9 season, and I think they went 4-8 one year, but they've really turned it around the last couple of years. I think they, entered this season with, almost 20 wins. Now I think they're over 20 wins in the last 2+ seasons. So to do that has been really impressive, and I think there's a lot of confidence in that program. And it really starts from the bottom with the younger youth teams, freshman teams, and moving up through the junior varsity ranks. And I think there's a lot of confidence, talent, and Santa Ynez has size, and they have some pretty good numbers over there. So McClurg has really done an impressive job getting that program to where it's at, considering where it was a few years ago. These guys were really struggling about 3 or 4 years ago, and here they are, competing for a playoff spot. I know they haven't made the postseason the last 2 years, even though they've won about 15 games. So, I think he's done a tremendous job there, and I don't know if he's getting enough credit for how good he's gotten this program in such a short time.
I think when you go back to scheduling, I mean, unfortunately in high school sports, regardless if it's football, basketball, whatever, you have to take what's given to you from a schedule standpoint. So if anybody expects Santa Ynez to schedule somebody from the Trinity League or the Mission League, I mean, that's still kind of far-fetched. I mean, Santa Ynez, as you mentioned, it was a program that's been down for a while, so unfortunately you have to build yourself back up by going against some some lesser opponents like San Marcos and Carpinteria, but it helps install that confidence going against a Lompoc, a St. Joseph, and the rest of the LPL slate. So, again, it's a credit to McClurg for how he's been able to really wake up a sleeping giant, because I remember the Ken Gruendijk-led teams of San Ynez, and they were not only producing victories, but they were producing UCLA Bruins as well. So maybe McClurg's starting to bring those days back.
Yeah, I think San Ynez is going to keep this going. They have their bye, and then they play Napomo. That's going to be their toughest game to date, taking on Napomo. I think they're a step above the Carps and the San Marcoses. So that's going to be a tougher matchup. I would still think San Ynez is favored going into that one. So they have their bye, and then they take on Napomo. And talking about Napomo, looking at SLO County as a whole, it's not been too much good news coming from SLO County on the football side. We talked about AG going 0-2. Napomo struggled at 0-2 as well. You thought Atascadero might be the best team in SLO County, and then they get blown out 49-0 against Ventura. The situation at Paso Robles is, really complicated. They had their game canceled in Bakersfield last week. They lost their coach. San Luis Obispo has been blown out twice by Santa Maria Valley teams. What do you think is going on with SLO County football? Just
a rough. Not the kind of start that SLO County wants, especially when your number one team, Aurora Grande, is 0-2. And then you have the situation with Larry Grant, and it sounds like Larry Grant has decided that he just wants to move on from Paso Robles. And I was also disappointed in Atascadero. Ventura has that long trip. They're not used to triple-digit weather, but they get beaten like a drum at home. So it goes to show you just like where things are with SLO County, and it makes me wonder if at this point should we just scratch off whoever's going to make a CIF or even a league title run in that area.
Yeah, I don't know. And looking at it deeper, I'm just curious if it's just a bad cycle of players, just the talent may not be there, or if people are kind of moving away from football in that area. It's a little more affluent area. Maybe that, kids say, I'm just going to play basketball or something like that. Focus on basketball, focus on another sport, focus on water polo. Are there kids in SLO County not coming out for football like they used to, or is it just, a cycle where the talent isn't there? It's an interesting thing to look at with the wins and losses this year, what's going on in SLO County.
It might be a cycle thing, because keep in mind, Atascadero is replacing Elijah Cooks. Paso Robles is replacing Christian Erickson. Aurora Grande is replacing Sam Ness and Matt Sill. But, you would think that schools like that still reloads. Yeah. And, unfortunately, we haven't really seen, who's that next premier guy as of yet.
All right, that's all we got for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in, and be sure to tune in Friday night. We'll be live at 6:45 p.m. at Pioneer Valley as Orcutt Academy hosts Mojave in an 8-man football game.